Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. My name's Jason Rualt. I'm with Cloud Advisory. And I want to talk to you about cloud security posture management. It's actually a fairly new space, at least from a naming perspective. Specifically, we're all about, at Cloud Advisory, audit, compliance, and enforcement. We were just recently named Gartner 2018 Cool Vendor, so I want to kind of introduce you to what we do. Just to set the stage a little bit, there's always reports every year from cybersecurity insiders, and there's other ones that are similar, that talk about what are the real headaches of cloud and the concerns. And it always comes back the same. It's lack of visibility into the infrastructure. It's also compliance. How do I prove I'm compliant, and how do I sustain that compliance? And then it's how do I consistently set security controls both across my cloud resources as well as my data center. And the last piece of information here is kind of interesting, and it's been changing over the last few years, is that people are finally understanding that their traditional security tools that they're used to using in their data centers just don't work for the cloud workloads. So that's an encouraging trend in understanding. So specifically, how do these concerns translate to risks and challenges? Well, the first one is clouds are black boxes. You really don't have great visibility. If you're a NOC or a security person, being able to understand what's happening in your cloud environment is very, very difficult. And you can't really improve your security posture without seeing what your infrastructure looks like. Next, the cloud-native security controls themselves are often misconfigured. Lots of well-known breaches about misconfigured security controls, leaving S3 buckets wide open for anonymous access, having ports left open. It goes on and on, right? And related to that is things left too wide open. Often, application developers, DevOps teams, they're trying to understand why their application is not working, so they just open up all their network security controls just to eliminate that, and then they leave it open, unfortunately, and that exposes you to great risk in your enterprise. The next point is about being able to detect when you're under attack and how you can actually respond to those types of events. You really actually need to be thinking about least privilege models and being able to lock down those environments so that you can eliminate the east-west spread of malware and things like that. And the last point here has to do with cloud's great in the self-service capabilities. It's brought great agility to the enterprises, but it's often at odds with how other teams in the enterprise need to work. The security teams, the risk and audit teams. And our solution is all about kind of bringing these teams together and enabling them to work together in a manner that doesn't slow them down, because you want to keep that agility and that self-service characteristics of the cloud. Let me blow through a couple things here. So what we bring to the table is the notion of actionable audit. So we provide the ability to go out and continuously discover all your cloud resources in an agentless manner, including all the metadata information about those resources, the network flows between those resources. You'll see the dependencies, interrelationships between those resources, and that gives you a great deal of insight. As well as you can then do ad hoc queries to diagnose potential security issues within the environment, understand whether or not least privilege models are actually being used and employed correctly. The next piece of the life cycle that we bring from a security perspective is compliance assurance. So you can actually create guardrails to hone in and keep your self-service users from maybe doing bad things, shooting themselves in the foot. We can do that from a network policy perspective, but also from other types of compliance checks, from identity and access management to checking whether or not you've got the logging enabled right, whether or not you have your control plane configured correctly. And I'll show you some examples of that. And you can also create your own custom checks, because everybody has their own kind of compliance standards that they need to meet within the organization, and you can customize and tune your own checks. And then the last part of the model of the life cycle is the least previous enforcement and being able to do things like push button and automatic remediation. So this life cycle actually starts out with most companies as a journey, because depending upon how mature your organization is or your processes are, you'll want to start at a different point in this journey. Typically, most people start with actionable audit then they become comfortable with the environment. They start setting up the guardrails I'm talking about, and they start then actually alerting and detecting on compliance and continually monitoring that. And eventually they get to the point where they're doing provisioning and orchestration of security policy. I'm going to jump to a demo because that's the best way to show this stuff. And the colors up there just don't look very good. Number of things I'm going to jump through. I'm not going to show you everything because I don't have enough time, but we can come talk to me at the demo or at the booth over here, C9. The first thing I'm going to jump into is this just quick view of visualization. So logging into the Cloud Advisory dashboard here, and we're actually looking at multiple workloads in AWS, Azure, OpenStack, and our data center. And I'm going to jump into visualization here, and we're going to drill down into these different cloud providers with the taxonomy and hierarchy notion that each of those cloud providers has. So here I'm drilling down into Azure, I'm seeing my subscriptions, I had AWS accounts, and I've got a number of OpenStack clusters here. And then you can further drill down. I'll drill down in this OpenStack cluster here. I've got 2 projects. In those projects, I've got the W stand for workloads, those are VMs, okay? And notice you can see the data flows already between all these entities, and it's aggregated up at the highest level and then down to the detail level, and you can go and look at the details of those workflows, or the network flows. All right, I'm going to jump over to this other Dev1 cluster here, and I actually see that there's some flows coming in from my unmanaged networks down here. So I'm going to drill down into this one project here, and I see that I have one VM in here called website. I'm going to click on this flow and look at it, and I see, I've got port 80,443. I also see I've got port 22 is open, and there's quite a few of unmanaged connections there. So I might want to understand that a little bit better. So I'm going to close this out. I'm going to look on the workload itself. I'm going to get the connection summary information of this workload. Just going to expand the view here a little bit. I'm going to sort on port and pull up all my port 22s. And I have a number of port 22s connecting. I'm just going to click on them. I see this is a connection from China, and so on and so forth. So I'm quickly understanding what's going on in this environment. Now, I don't think port 22 is supposed to be open like that, so I'm going to look at the security group rules on this workload. I can see I've got the default policy here. It's kind of standard, allowing outbound everything, inbound within the project. That one looked all right. I'll look at this external net security policy or group here, and I see I do have a port 22, but it's to a specific IP. That's good. So that's not the problem of this connectivity. I'll click on the web security group rule, and here I see port 22 inbound from anywhere. That's not a good thing, okay? So I probably want to take care of that. So just quickly by visualizing, I was able to diagnose that. But what about actually turning this into a rule or a check that can continually run in your environment? And that's what the next piece of the demo is I'll talk to you about. All right, so I'm going to log back into the console here. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to this network policy inspector here, and it's this ad hoc reporting tool. And what you're seeing on the screen here is all the security group rules across all the cloud providers that you've discovered, okay? And you can quickly then create queries to look across that environment. So I want to find out about that port 22. So I'm going to query for port 22, protocol TCP, direction inbound. I'm also going to make sure that we're going to set the remote to be any IP. Just do a quick search here, and we'll see we've identified 67 uses of this in my environment. That's not good, right? So let me narrow this down a bit. This is OpenStack conference, so I'm going to switch to just my OpenStack providers or my OpenStack resources, and I'll see, okay, I've got 7 potential risks here that have been identified, and you can see that the one on the bottom is that website I showed you on the earlier screen. So here we've found some issues that we may want to actually continually find, right? So what we can do is we can actually save this query as a compliance check that we're going to continually run in the environment. Right here I'm just showing you the security group rule that's in, but I'm going to save it here as a check. Just give it a name, and you can create all sorts of network policy checks here for your enterprise to set up those guardrails. Okay, I'm going to jump to a compliance report now that actually has this check running in it. So I have this production engineering environment with actually has a number of has AWS, Azure, and OpenStack resources in it. You can see I've got a number of checks in here around make sure SQL encryption is set to on and things like that. That's for Azure. I'm going to filter this view. I just want to look at that SSH inbound check that I created, right? So I'm going to pull that one up. I'm going to look at it because I see that it has some failed checks, and here's all the failures that I found across those cloud environments for SSH inbound. I can see all the details about them. I can scroll down here and I'll find that here's my website VM in OpenStack. Okay. And what I can do here is, because everything's configurable, I can configure to automatically remediate this. In this case, I have it set up so that operator has to remediate it. So there's a little remediate button there. You can also configure to automatically notify the user who owns the VM of a problem. I had automatic notifications turned on. That's why the little resend button's there. And next to it is telling me when an email was sent. So I'm just going to go ahead and click remediate on this because I don't think our website needs to have port 22 open like that to the world. So I'm going to click remediate, notify, but before I do that, I'm going to jump to OpenStack Horizon. Here's my website instance. I'm going to look at the security group rules attached to it. You'll see that there's 3, web, external, and default. I'm going to go into the network security group for web because that has the rule that's the problem. And here you can see port 22 NEIP, right? So I'm going to go jump back to my console now, and I'm going to click that remediate button, and I'm going to choose remediate and notify. So this just allows me to actually send a notification to the user of that VM saying, hey, we removed this security group rule. And it's a templated based email, and it's editable. So go ahead and submit that. And now we're going to jump back to the Horizon console. And in the Horizon console, you're going to see when we refresh this page here that port 22 is gone now, so it's no longer in my list. So it's been removed from the system. The next time the audit report or the check runs, that's not going to fail. Okay. All right. Now this is pretty cool. So auditing and compliance is more than just the network security policies. We actually enable a lot of other types of checks. So I mentioned CIS checks for AWS and Azure and so forth. There's no CIS checks today for OpenStack, but there is a security. There are security guidelines and a security checklist for how to securely set up and configure your OpenStack control plane. So I'm going to show that to you. Here we have I have this compliance group here. I'm just showing you that it can be configured for how often the checks run, how often the reports are generated, whether or not operator alerts are sent, whether or not customer alerts or emails are sent. But if I go down and look at the checks in here, there's a number of checks that have been defined. I can go and at the check level, I can specify how do I want the severity to appear on this? What do I want the interval to be? Do I want auto remediation to occur and so forth? Okay. Now I'm going to jump to the report here. So this OS testing compliance group here is just pointed at a single OpenStack cluster. You can configure it to go over a number of clusters, or this is just a single cluster. And it's set up to run hourly. So I'm going to look at the summary report. And the first thing you'll notice is I have an assessment score on the left. And then it breaks out for me the risks by severity, which tells me how bad I'm really doing. And I have a lot of high risk items here, so I'm not doing very well. I see that I have 30 risks that have been identified in this OpenStack environment. And then I can see trending over time. And then the breakout by risk severity, which comes from the checks themselves. So the OpenStack security checklist will define these categories. The networking category comes from the network policy checks. I actually have a couple of those in here as well. Okay. But we're doing things like looking whether or not you've got TLS configured for compute talking to Cinder, and whether or not you've got correct permissions on files and ownership, user and group ownership. Here's an example where we're looking at block storage, whether or not TLS is enabled. Okay, and it's failing, so there needs to be a configuration change here. That's an example of one that you don't remediate through Cloud Advisory because you actually have to go reconfigure that. But here's another check where we're looking at the Horizon dashboard, local configuration settings, whether or not it's owned by root and Horizon, and it's failing because it's owned by Apache, which is not good. So here I could send notifications. I could actually remediate this right from the console. Okay. Now, there's other checks that I have in here besides OpenStack checks. So if I wanted to know just how I was doing from my OpenStack checklist perspective, I can run a templated report here. You can see some other templated reports I can run CIS-wise, but we're just going to look at the OpenStack security checklist report. And here are the security checklist guidelines. I can see my score is even lower than it was on my other assessment if I look just at the checklist items. And I can see specifically where I'm failing and why. And I could print this out, I could export it in multiple formats, give it to my internal teams to fix things, give it to my auditors. The main thing about compliance is that you don't just do one check. You need to actually continually check and show that you're compliant over time. So we have the ability to go back in history and see at any point in time like how you've been doing. And you can go back and look at those reports and you really demonstrate continuous compliance. Here we're just broke it out by category. I could see that I was spiking on the network side. That top line's the network line. Had a lot of failures there, and that's probably because I had a bunch of VMs spin up that had bad policies associated with them. Okay, I'm going to jump away from that, and I'm going to go to, this is kind of a cool demo. This demonstrates policy orchestration as well as the ability to kind of find and fix application problems. So what I've got here is an OpenStack and a Kubernetes environment. Okay, so here's my OpenStack, or here's my Kubernetes provider. I've got one cluster in there called Kube2, and I've opened it up and I see the namespaces. Okay, these are the Kubernetes namespaces. I see the default. I'm going to go into the default namespace, and now those S's stand for services. Those are Kubernetes services. If you have deployments, you'll see those as well. I can open up that front end service, and I see I've got 2 pods in there. Okay, so again, you're seeing everything from the nomenclature and hierarchy of that particular cloud provider. If I drill down in on the network policy for Kubernetes, I can see the specific policies that have been defined and also the label-based policies. Okay, these are all using native policies. So this is using Kubernetes network policies. This application, that front end talks to a back end, which is Redis. There's a slave service and master service, and they have pods in it. So I was just expanding that. I'm going to zoom in on just that view there, just so we can look at those items. So we've got a front end item, which is, it's a guest book. It's an application with a guest book, and it talks to the back end to show the guest names, okay? So the front end talks to the Redis master and slave. So we're going to go look at this application. Here it is. It's a simple HTML application. Down on underneath the submit button, you'll see the guests who have registered. If I type in a new name, it's going to add them to the guest list. Okay. Now, if I jump back to Cloud Advisory and do a little refresh here, you're going to see some lines pop up. Okay. I can see now there's a line going from me. That's me, Jason. That's my IP space. It's going to the front end application. Okay. And I can see the front end application talk to the Redis slave. It did that to read the guest book, and then it talked to Redis, it went to kubedns first to resolve. Then it talked to Redis slave to read from the database, and then it also talked to Redis master. And that line will come up in a minute to actually do the write to the database. So once I expand my OpenStack object here, the screen refreshes. Now you see the line to Redis master. Now, so we have a working application. That's how it works, right? We've got the front end talking to the back end. What if we move that front end into OpenStack? Wouldn't that be cool if you could manage and control the policies of your OpenStack workloads now intertwined talking to a Kubernetes cluster? Well, we're going to do that. I'm going to expand this OpenStack cluster. I've got 3 projects in it. I'm going to open the JSON project. I've got a front-end VM. It's an OpenStack VM. Okay, it's running the same type of the same code that's in the Kubernetes service front end. Okay, but it's on OpenStack. So I'm going to go now and try to hit this application front end, and the front end is going to want to talk to the Redis master and slave in the Kubernetes cluster, because I don't have that in my OpenStack environment. So I'm going to go to my browser here. Now I'm on the front end running on OpenStack. Okay, I'm going to refresh this screen to hit it. And the first thing you should know or notice is that there's no name showing up down here, right? So the application had a problem. The front end rendered itself, but it wasn't able to talk to the back end, to the database, right? So let's take a look at that. I'm going to jump back into the Cloud Advisory console, do another refresh here, okay? And here you can see a flow line from JSON to the front end in OpenStack. And now you see a flow from front end to my Redis slave, and it's blocked. It's the dashed line means it's blocked, and it's red because it's non-compliant. It's not compliant with the policies that are on that Kubernetes cluster, so it couldn't talk to the back end, okay? Now let's fix that. I can turn that flow actually into policy. I have that in another demo, but I'm gonna create policy a little bit different way. Here we're just showing you that it's port 6379 it's trying to talk on from the front end to the Redis slave. Just getting, you can see the specific IP details here. I'm a little over time, but there's nobody after me. I'm going to take advantage. Okay, so I'm on the policy screen for the OpenStack front end. Okay, and policies has been defined based upon labels or context for that workload. So on the left-hand side here, you see app is guestbook, tiers web, names front end. That's metadata about my workload. I could have other things in there like it's part of this project, it's in this AWS VPC, but that defines the context, and then Cloud Advisory discovers everything in your cloud environment that matches that context. In this case, it found one VM in OpenStack called the front end, and I have no rules defined in the middle here for this VM for security policy, so it's an unmanaged state right now. I could have clicked on that line, that blocked line, and said turn that to policy, and it would have auto-populated this for me. But in this demo here, we're actually just going to go and create the rules through the UI. So I'm going to add a rule to make sure that I can talk to it from the JSON namespace over HTTP, because I'm going to be putting security group rules on this and making this workload managed, and I need to be able to talk to it still. So put that in there, and then I'm going to select my Redis slave, and I'm going to make sure it can talk on 6379. Okay, that was the port that it was trying to talk to read the database. I also need to set up the Redis master because I need to be able to write to the database. So that's 6379 as well. So I'm going to add those in. I'm going to click submit. And now what's really cool right now is it's actually going out and provisioning the security group rules in OpenStack on that workload, as well as it's going to the Kubernetes cluster and provisioning the right rules across all the pods. Okay, it calculates the specific security group rules or network policies that need to be defined down to a /32 level. Okay, so if I click on this VM here, I'm going to look at the status of provisioning. Right now it says pending, so it takes 30 seconds or so to provision. I'm going to refresh. All right, it's already been provisioned. It's all says provisioned, and if you look at the details here. Inbound, it's allowing port 80 from 2 IPs, so my network space was set up for 2 IPs, and then outbound, it's set up to talk to the Redis master and Redis slave, and if you notice, the ports there don't say 6379 on the outbound, so we're smart enough to know that the Kubernetes service is exposed as a node port type, and there is a NAT that's happening on the systems that they're running on, right? So Kubernetes is natting it from 6379 to 3057 and 32255, and we automatically discover that and set that up in your rules. All right, now just to show you the other end, so in the Redis slave, if we look at the tag policies here, we've added OpenStack inbound 6379 on the Redis slave, and then it'll be the same thing on the master. So if we go back to our application now, and I do a refresh, you're going to see that it's going to now be able to read the guest book. So I've got the 2 names in there, and it's also going to be able to write. All right, so we were able to write. And if we go back to Cloud Advisory console, we're going to see here that we all now have green lines, solid lines, so it's compliant to the policy we specified. There's solid lines because connectivity happened. Okay, and you can see the flow to all the objects. Okay. All right. I'm going to show you one last demo here real quick. So this is a policy enforcement demo. This is where you've actually define policy and we're orchestrating and managing the security group rules in your environment as your workloads scale up and scale down. They're being provisioned. So Cloud Advisory knows the desired state of the policy, right? But what happens if somebody goes out and manipulates the policy using the Horizon UI, using API, or the RESTful interface? We'll detect that, and then we can revert that, right? So I'm going to jump into visualization here. I'm going to drill down into a set of OpenStack projects. I've got this JRDB project and a JR app project. Okay, so 2 projects. And in this project, I have a load balancer workload here. I can see I've got some tag policy defined to it. I've got a security group here. See, it just says CV, JR, LB, and some big number. Okay, just remember the first part, JR, LB1. Okay, we're going to go. We'll just look at this. You'll see that the security group rules in here. We're going to jump into Horizon, and we're going to go look at that security group policy. Okay, so I'm going to log into the console here. Okay, jump into the LB1, look at the security groups that are attached. You'll see I've got that one security group attached there. Okay, and now I'm going to go into the security group section, and I'm going to change that security group. So here it is at the top. I'm going to do manage rules, and let's just say I could add rules here. I could remove rules. I could actually detach the security group. I'm going to remove these port 8080. Egress. So this is the load balancer talking 8080 egress to the web servers. I'm going to remove those. I may be doing this wrongfully, rightfully, I don't know, but I probably just broke the application. Horizon didn't tell me I broke it. I don't know how long it's going to take for somebody to complain about the application being broken. It'll probably be pretty quick, but it'll probably take a while to figure out why it's broken. If I go in here and refresh, I can see on this workload, I've got another alert here. And we've already detected there's an enforcement violation, and I'm going to look at the details of that alert. So we'll look specifically at the alert here, and we'll see, oh, this security group's had 2 rules removed, okay, on port 8080 egress to those 2 IPs. And I have the opportunity to roll back, push button roll back, but I actually have this configured right now to do auto rollback, okay. So it's going to, as soon as it detected that problem, it actually went through the process of rolling and remediating that. And if I actually go look at my acknowledged alerts, I'm going to have another alert here saying that, hey, that unauthorized change was remediated, okay? So now if we jump to the Horizon interface and do a refresh, we're going to see the port 8080 egress added, okay? So now those are back in. So we quickly mitigated a broken application. If new security group rules were added, or another security group was added, and we opened that up from a security and risk perspective, we would have detected that and we would have remediated that potential security issue. So I went over my time. I appreciate your attention. Please come talk to me or people from Cloud Advisory at our booth. We're right around the corner over here, booth C9. Appreciate your time. Thank you.